In conclusion, Gyre is a B- tier Warframe who could be made significantly better if she just got some slight number tweaks, particularly for her 4 and her 3. She also might get fixed whenever they eventually release augments for her abilities, but those are always just band-aids and they never feel good. And then there's also Archon Shards. You could also fix a lot of her problems with Archon Shards, such as slotting one natural talent shard or one or two energy sustain shards like the mini energizes, and then extra ability strength for damage. But again, Archon Shards are a cursed way to say that a Warframe could be good, and saying future augments might fix her is at best just wishful thinking. Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Today we'll be going over Gyre, as she has been pretty much made into a new Warframe with the recent release of her new augment mod, Cathode Current. So first things first, of course, let's go over the build. The first build is an all-purpose Pillage build that is reaching 400% strength through growing power, giving us 25%, Augmented giving us 60%, and then of course, Moderai giving us a final 40% buff through Sling Strength. This gives us 125% more strength when everything is procced, which is very easy to maintain, pushing us to 403% strength. This means that we are full stripping with Pillage in one cast, and we are also full stripping their shields in one cast. This is very, very nice. Now you may notice that I also do not have Arcane Energize slotted, and that's because I found Molt Vigor for the initial 45% ability strength to be significantly better than Energize on this build without flow, as Arcane Energize, you just waste most of the energy it's giving you, because it will fill up like 80% of your energy pool, and usually you're around half. So I just found that the extra energy that Molt Vigor gives you passively through Cathode Grace to outperform Energize. Now there is an alternative to this build. In fact, there are multiple, but the second best one that I found was dropping Transient Fortitude and Growing Power for Corrosive Projection and Primed Flow. And then also at that point dropping Molt Vigor for Energize. This gives you a big enough energy pool for Energize to be more useful. The downside is you lose passive sustain, and I did find this build to be worse. Another downside is you might be seeing that the duration goes up, and you might be thinking that that's a positive, but it's actually a negative. See, with Cathode Current, your duration is irrelevant for both your 3 and 4, as your 4 now gets extended alongside your Cathode Grace, giving both of these abilities infinite duration, as long as you have enough, and enough is around like, I don't know, like 70% durations, like the minimum I would go just for comfort's sake. Which means that your 2 also doesn't care about duration, and Pillage actually performs better the lower duration you are. You might be wondering why, and the reason is because the more duration you have, the longer the period between Pillage expanding and retracting, giving you a second shield gate. So the lower duration you have, the more often your Pillage will shield gate you. And you might be thinking, oh, well, you won't have enough range on Pillage if you have too low duration. And this couldn't be further from the truth. You can see I am about 40 meters from these enemies, and if I cast Pillage, they will get full stripped. So even with this range and duration, I still have a longer than 40 meter range with Pillage. And it just retracts quicker, again increasing the survivability massively. So again, I personally preferred this build with Transient Fortitude, no flow, growing power, and Molt Vigor. As for the final 2 builds, I won't stay too long on these because these are more circumstantial builds. Like, Terrify is better if you're in cramped corridors, because Terrify doesn't care about terrain as much as Pillage does. This is what I was using for mirror defense, and it felt really nice. I was just running around passively killing everything while collecting coins. The final build is tailored towards infested enemies on the Steel Path and non-Steel Path relics, and ignore Shooting Gallery. Instead, this would be Nourish. Combat Discipline and Arcane Avenger to give a raw 45% crit chance, but if you really don't want to, you don't have to. You could just replace these with normal mods, such as, like, I don't know, Growing Power, Brief Respite to be able to drop some Augur mods and run some better mods. Anything you want. Like, you don't have to run Avenger in Combat Discipline. And you could also have a choice to make here. You could either replace your first ability, which is Arc Sphere, or you can replace Coil Horizon with Nourish. See, versus Infested and in low star chart missions, you don't really need to group the enemies together. So her 2 is not as important, and in versus Infested, they run to you, so also having a grouping tool is not as important. So you could find that the Arc Sphere is better versus Infested in higher level missions, as now you have a lingering field that is slowing them down and just nuking them quicker. But again, that is personal preference, so that's just a suggestion that you can choose to ignore or make use of. As for the weapon loadouts, the primary I was using was a Phantasma Prime. So the Phantasma Prime has enough base crit chance where whenever you're running very high strength, like such as this Pillage build, oh, there was one thing I forgot to talk about, but I'll get to that later. So with this build, once everything is procced and fully stacked, you have 448% ability strength. This means that your Cathode Current is giving you like 230-ish% crit chance, which means that even the Phantasma Prime will get to a 35.6% crit chance. That is enough with this weapon's high fire rate and high multi-shot for this weapon to crit enough to proc your 4, because your 4 chains to enemies once you crit. Not only that, but your abilities will be critting themselves, so your weapon actually critting isn't as important as people make it out to be. But if you don't want to use the Phantasma and you just want to use a weapon that fully synergizes with it, you could use the Amprex, but I will say the Phantasma Prime felt significantly better. You can also just choose to ignore having an electricity weapon altogether and run something like a Cedo for AoE priming with the Alt Fire, or just a standard AoE weapon such as the Vermis Splicer, the Tonkor, the Brahma, the Bubonico, etc., etc. As for the secondary is what I was using to kill Acolytes, and I was just using a Spore Lacer build with 2 Augur mods, and this Riven is just a Toxin mod supplement. Using Cascadia Flare as it's the only way to really stack it. You could also run, what is it? Yeah, you could also run Pax Bolt if you really wanted to, but I'll be honest, this seems a little extra and not really worth it, as it is way too annoying to keep up, which might sound hypocritical based on the next thing I'll say, because this is what I forgot to mention earlier. With with your Parazon, you can run Power Drain on Gyre, as now you have 2 abilities that have infinite duration, and one of them can be recast at any time, meaning that you can have Power Drain on to increase your ability strength to 498%. And it will last forever for your 4 and 3. It's a little annoying to proc everything for your 3, because you have to reset yourself, then get a Mercy kill, and then proc Vigor, and then press the 3. So that might be a little too situational. But your 4, it is extremely easy to get a 500% strength buff on your 4, which just nukes enemies and can scale to level cap since you're also stripping with your Pillage. Another mod that I would tech in here is the start of the mission is actually pretty difficult because you don't have enough energy. So I would recommend running, I don't actually have it. I would recommend running the Parazon mod that makes you invisible after hacking a console, because the start of the mission is kind of rough, so that 20 seconds of invisibility that it gives you can make the start of the mission nice and easy, because you'll have those 20 seconds of invisibility to build up your energy and get all your buffs up over Swift Mercy here. And then as for the melee, I was just using a Praetos for the parkour velocity and sprint speed, but you of course can run whatever you want. Last but not least is of course a Panzer with a standard build with the synth mods equipped. Now, let's move on to the rankings. We will be discussing Gyre in relation to 4 separate topics. Firstly, her KPM, secondly, her survivability, thirdly, her viability, and finally, how fun she is to play. All this data is sampled from a 1-hour solo Steel Path bot run with no specters and no on-call. Now, of course, I've already made a Gyre video, so I will try to go through these topics quickly as I shouldn't have to repeat everything. So let's begin with the first topic, her KPM. Before, I gave Gyre an A+ rank for KPM, as you didn't have a way to get to full strength to strip in one cast of Pillage, and Terrify is, of course, not that great on her. Now, you can both full strip in one cast of Pillage, and you no longer have to waste a lot of time recasting your 4, because the 4 had a stupidly long cast time. So now that you don't have to do that, you can also just get more KPM with your guns. And that's not to mention the fact that Cathode Current is also making your 4 chain to additional enemies and doing more damage. Beforehand, Gyre could get roughly 130 KPM in her absolute best case scenario. And in the mission that I'm showing footage from, I got about 122-ish KPM, and the tile layout was absolutely terrible. So she went from getting 120 to 130 KPM in her absolute best case scenarios to now getting 120 to 130 KPM in some of her worst case scenarios. And on top of the fact that you now full strip in one cast of Pillage, your scalability is significantly better. So I think her KPM rank deserves to go from an A+ to a flat S rank. Now, moving on to her survivability, beforehand I gave her a C+ for survivability, but I do believe I significantly overranked that. For a while, I've been wanting to remake the Gyre video because I feel like I gave her a B- in the end, but I feel like she was actually a C tier Warframe. I don't know why I overranked her. I think I just wasn't aware of the power level of the other Warframes in the game yet, because I did Gyre pretty early on. But now her survivability, again, is actually pretty decent. And the reason for this is because Cathode Current does so much. Like, you're killing more enemies, which obviously if there's less enemies on screen, your survivability goes up. But you also don't get stuck in the cast time of your 4, which is a problem. Like, you could just... if you started casting your 4 on old Gyre, if an enemy shot you right as you started casting, you would be stuck in animation until your shield gate wore off, like your shield gate immunity. So then you could just die before you could press other buttons. On top of this, her sustain was really, really bad, which it still isn't fantastic, but it's definitely significantly better than it was. And obviously, if you run out of energy, that can lead to you dying. So I believe that she now actually has a pretty average to maybe slightly above average survivability rank, and I will give her survivability a B+. Now moving on to her viability rank, and beforehand I gave her a C rank, and I believe that this has also gone up. The reason I believe that her viability has gone up is because now you can more easily kill enemies and just without setup by just popping your 4 and 3 than just running through an exterminate mission. Whereas before you didn't quite have enough damage, and then you also didn't really have the sustain to do it. But now that your 3 and 4 are permanent duration, as long as you don't fall behind your team, that is a bad plus, which is going to affect the ranking a bit. If you have somebody else nuking the map in like in an endless mission, in a non-endless mission, like let's use an exterminate as an example. If somebody runs ahead of you and already kills everything while you're trying to set up your 4 and 3, what will happen is you just won't kill anything, so then you don't extend the duration of your 3 and 4, and then you're useless. But if you're the sole nuker, or if you can keep up with everybody or get ahead of everybody, she is very good in non-endless missions. And then of course she's pretty average in missions such as excavations and stuff, whereas most other frames suck in excavation. But since she just has such high KPM, and her shock abilities will soft CC enemies, not great, she's decent there. Like, obviously you still need somebody to actually protect the excavator, but like, she's not a bad pick in an excavation mission either. And the other bad mission type that she has is disruption, but even there she's pretty good because she has a movement speed buff attached to her 4, which obviously you want movement speed and disruption to like run around, find the demo, pick up keys, get to the conduits, etc. And then she also has a crit buff on her 3, which again you also want for disruption because you want a weapon buff to kill the Demoliths easier. And then she can armor strip the Demoliths with Pillage, she can armor strip the ads with Pillage to get the keys, and then she has just a persistent nuke to kill ads, to get keys, etc., etc. Like, she's just decent in pretty much every game mode, but she does have the flaw to where if she gets outpaced, she will be kind of useless. So I will give her a B plus rank for her viability, up from a C, which she previously got. Now her fun rank, I previously gave her a B, and I also think I overranked this. And I will just bump that up to an A, because now that a lot of her problems have been fixed, she's just a lot more fun to play, and you don't get depression after playing her like you used to. So that's where I'll leave it at that. And one more thing before I move on to the conclusion, I would like to mention Archon Shards, because they do a lot for her. Like, normally I don't really address Archon Shards too often, but with this particular Gyre build, it does a lot. For instance, if you can slot 4 Strength Archon Shards, and that replaces Madurai. Like, you still want Madurai for the 40% initial strength at the start of the mission for your 3 and 4, and whenever you recast them later in the mission. But outside of your 3 and 4, if you have 4 Strength Shards, that means that you no longer have to proc Madurai to full strip in one cast with Pillage, which is insane QOL, and it increases your KPM even further. On top of that, she's actually good with blue shards. Like, normally blue shards are worthless, and they don't really have any value, but Gyre can run max energy shards for blue shards, and it makes her build extremely comfy. Like, your max energy is only 240. So if you have, like, even if you only throw on 1 blue shard, you're increasing your max energy by 20%, which is massive. And not only that, if you use 2 Talforged red shards instead of 4, so if you can use 2 Talforged red shards for strength, and then 2 non-Talforged shards for strength, still get the 40% strength to replace, so 2 Talforged strength, and then 1 non-Talforged strength, and now you still have the 40% strength, meaning that you no longer have to use Madurai, and now you have 2 open slots, so you can put 2 blue shards for max energy. Like, it does so much for her. It doesn't really make her stronger per se, but it makes her so much more comfortable to play. And I'll leave it at that. In conclusion, Gyre is an A-tier Warframe who is pretty fun to play, universally good in almost every single mission type, and has the potential to reach extremely high KPM, only rivaled by a few other Warframes.